The sun was dipping low behind the barren hills, painting the sky with strokes of crimson and gold, as a lonely cowboy rode along the dusty trail with nothing but the sound of his horse's hooves breaking the silence. He had grown used to the quiet, used to the solitude that came from years of working the land and tending to his cattle. But on this evening something stirred inside him, a strange heaviness that pressed on his chest like the weight of an untold story. He guided his horse down toward the river, thinking only of giving the animal water and resting his weary bones, when his eyes caught a sight that froze his heart. There, waist deep in the cold, rushing water, stood a young woman with dark hair clinging wet against her pale face, her expression distant and hollow, her gaze fixed not on the shore, but on the endless current pulling at her body. The cowboy felt his pulse quicken as realization struck. She was not there to cool off or to cross the river. She was there to let it take her away forever. Without a second thought, he leaped from his horse, boots splashing in the shallows as he charged forward. The water bit cold against his legs, but he ignored it. His focus locked on her trembling figure. "Stop," he shouted, his voice echoing over the stones and reeds. She flinched but did not turn, her lips quivering as though whispering a farewell to the world. Panic surged through him as he waded deeper, the current tugging at his clothes, and he stretched out his hand. "Take my hand. Don't do this." For a moment it seemed she would ignore him, that she would surrender to the pull of the river. But then her eyes flickered toward his, and in them he saw a storm of pain, sorrow, and exhaustion that no one her age should ever carry. Her body swayed as if the decision had already been made. Yet his voice cut through the chaos inside her. "You don't have to go like this. You're stronger than this river." She shook her head, her voice breaking as she whispered, "There's nothing left for me. No family, no home, no reason to keep fighting." The cowboy's chest tightened, memories of his own losses flashing through his mind. Nights spent staring at empty chairs by the fire, mornings where silence greeted him louder than any noise. He knew what loneliness could do to a person, how it could hollow out their spirit until nothing but shadows remained. But he also knew that giving in to despair meant letting it win. With every ounce of strength in his body, he stepped closer, thrust his hand forward, and locked eyes with her. "Maybe you can't see a reason right now," he said firmly, "but I do. I see it in you. You're alive, and that means you still have a chance. Don't let the river take that away." For a heartbeat the world seemed to pause, only the rush of water filling the silence between them. Then, slowly, hesitantly, her hand lifted, fingers trembling as though unsure they deserved saving. The cowboy's grip closed around hers, strong and unyielding, and with one powerful pull he dragged her toward him, fighting against the current until she stumbled against his chest. She gasped, coughing as water poured from her lungs, and he held her upright, his arm steady around her shoulders. They stumbled together to the bank, collapsing onto the damp earth, both soaked to the bone and breathing hard. For a long moment neither spoke, the sound of the river filling the air between them like an unspoken secret. Finally, she turned her tear-streaked face toward him, her voice hoarse. "Why would you stop me? Why do you care? You don't even know me." The cowboy's gaze softened, his thumb brushing a strand of wet hair from her cheek. "Because no one deserves to be alone in their pain. I don't need to know your story to know you're worth saving." Her eyes widened, disbelief flickering across her expression. But before she could respond, he added words that seemed to pour straight from his soul. "If you truly feel there's nowhere else to go, then come with me. Live with me instead. I don't have riches or a big family, just a quiet ranch and a simple life. But I can promise you a place to belong. You don't have to fight alone anymore." His voice carried no demand, only a steady warmth that wrapped around her like a blanket against the cold. She stared at him, her lips trembling, her heart caught between fear and hope. "Why me?" she whispered. "I'm broken." He shook his head slowly, his hand never leaving hers. "Broken doesn't mean you can't be whole again. Sometimes the most beautiful things are the ones that survive the hardest storms." Tears spilled down her cheeks, not of despair this time, but of release. The first crack in the walls she had built around her heart. She leaned into him, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, as if it were proof that life still had something to offer. The cowboy wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close, and for the first time, in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to believe she wasn't alone. The river behind them raged on, carrying away her sorrow. But on that bank a new chapter was beginning, one written not in despair but in hope, where a stranger's courage and compassion became the lifeline that pulled her back from the edge. And as the last light of the sun melted into the horizon, two lost souls found each other, proving that even in the darkest moments, love and kindness can be the strongest force of all. Friends, if this story touched your heart, remember this life is precious, and no matter how heavy the storm feels, there's always a reason to hold on. Sometimes, hope comes when you least expect it, just like it did for her. If you want to hear more powerful stories like this, make sure you subscribe to The Gift of Kindness, because every story we share is a journey worth living. The days that followed their fateful meeting by the river were not easy, yet they carried a strange kind of beauty that neither of them had expected. The cowboy brought her to his small ranch, a humble place nestled against the hills, where the wind carried the scent of wild sage and the nights were filled with the sounds of crickets and distant coyotes. At first, she was quiet, almost fragile, moving through the rooms of his wooden cabin like a shadow unsure of its place. She wore borrowed clothes that hung loose on her frame, her eyes often drifting toward the horizon as though the river still called her name. The cowboy, though a man of few words, gave her space, but also presence. He cooked simple meals, left the fire burning warm, and every morning greeted her with a nod that carried unspoken reassurance. You are safe here. You are not alone. Slowly, the weight of despair began to loosen its grip on her, and she started to see pieces of life worth holding onto. She helped him with chores, her hands learning the rhythm of ranch work, feeding the horses, carrying buckets of water, and mending fences under the golden light of the afternoon sun. The cowboy noticed how her shoulders straightened day by day, how the haunted look in her eyes softened when she laughed at the stubborn mule that always tried to steal extra hay. In those small moments, he saw her spirit awakening, fragile but undeniably alive. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sky burn orange with the setting sun, she finally spoke of her past. Her voice trembled as she told him about the family she had lost, the betrayals that had cut her deeper than any knife, and the crushing loneliness that had driven her to the river that night. The cowboy listened silently, his hat resting on his knee, his eyes steady on her as though every word she spoke was sacred. When she finished, tears streaking down her face, he reached over and took her hand gently. You don't have to carry all that alone anymore, he said softly. The past may have broken you, but it doesn't get to decide your future. You do. Those words planted a seed in her heart, and she began to believe him. The following weeks brought more light than darkness. She found herself smiling when the cowboy sang quietly to his horse, laughing when the old barn cat curled up in her lap, and marveling at the way the stars stretched endlessly across the night sky. Yet healing was not a straight road. There were nights she woke trembling from nightmares, her chest tight with panic, and the cowboy would sit by her side, his hand steady on hers until her breathing calmed. He never judged her, never rushed her, just stayed, proving with his presence that she was not alone in her battles. In return, she began to see the loneliness he carried too, the quiet ache in his eyes when he looked at the empty chair across the table, the silence in his voice when he spoke of friends long gone. One night, under the silver glow of the moon, she whispered to him, "You saved me from the river, but I think you were drowning too. Maybe we saved each other." The cowboy's chest tightened at her words, but he didn't deny them. Instead, he smiled, small and genuine, and said, "Maybe you're right." From that night on, something shifted between them. Their bond deepened not just in shared chores and quiet evenings, but in the unspoken understanding that two broken souls had found in each other the strength to heal. Seasons changed, and the ranch flourished under their shared care. The woman who once wanted to let the river take her away now rose with the sun, her hands calloused from work, her heart lighter with each passing day. She found joy in simple things, the laughter of children from a nearby homestead, the warmth of bread baking in the oven, the sound of the cowboy's deep voice telling her stories of old trails and wild rides. And the cowboy, once resigned to a life of solitude, found his days colored with laughter, warmth, and the quiet comfort of companionship. One evening, as they sat again by the river bank, the same river that once almost stole her away, she looked at him, her eyes shining with gratitude. "I thought this river was the end of me," she said softly. "But now it feels like the place where my life truly began." He reached over, took her hand, and nodded. Sometimes, the places that nearly break us become the places that save us. They sat in silence, the river rushing past them. But this time, it wasn't calling her away. It was carrying their sorrows far downstream, leaving only hope in its wake. As the stars blinked awake in the sky above, she leaned her head on his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, both of them finally at peace. What began as a rescue had grown into a promise, a life shared not out of desperation, but out of love, proving that even in the darkest corners of despair, there is always light waiting to be found. Friends, if this chapter touched your heart, remember that every day you choose to keep going is another chance for life to surprise you. Just like she found her reason to live again, so can anyone who refuses to let go. And if you want to hear more powerful stories of courage, hope, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe to The Gift of Kindness, because here we share not just stories, but journeys that remind us all to never give up on life.